Okay. I'll call this meeting, the public hearing, to order. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Richard Stewart, and on behalf of City Council, I'd like to welcome everyone here to tonight's public hearing into the bylaws that will be introduced to you in a moment by the City Clerk. Council for the City of Coquitlam has given first reading to these bylaws and directed that a public hearing be held. And it'll work this way. Staff from the City's Planning and Development Department will present a summary of the proposed bylaw before us. The floor will then be open to anyone in attendance that wishes to let us know his or her views on the proposed bylaw. Those that have pre-registered to speak on each bylaw will be given the first opportunity to speak, and then we'll open the floor. I stress to all of you that this is a public hearing. It's an opportunity for anyone who has a view on the proposed bylaws to make that view known to council members. Council members are here with an open mind and are here to listen to your input. No one has prejudged the outcome of these applications, but Council has asked that I set down some rules for our public hearings. First of all, it's not a question and answer period. It's not an opportunity to debate the merits of any of the proposed bylaws with either council members, with staff, or with those in the audience who might have a different perspective than your own. We ask that each speaker please restrict his or her comments to the proposed bylaw, be as brief and concise as possible. We ask speakers to respect a 5-minute time limit in order that everyone who wishes to speak is able to do so. You can speak more often than once. You can get up again at the end of the line if you have more good information to give us. We ask that the audience members, everyone in the audience, please be respectful of each speaker and allow that speaker to make his or her points without interruption. And to that end, we ask that there be no clapping, no cheering, no booing, no jeering of any presentation made this evening. As chair of the hearing, I reserve the right to conclude any presentation that doesn't relate to the bylaw, that becomes abusive, or which becomes repetitive of views that the speaker has already made known to council members. Please note that if you wish to provide a written submission to be included in the public record of the meeting, you have to hand in that written submission to the clerk prior to the adjournment of that item on the agenda. After we adjourn an item on a public hearing agenda, the law says we can't receive any further information until the item is disposed of, that is either given fourth reading or voted down. We can't receive any more information until that takes place. Immediately following adjournment of the public hearing tonight, a regular council meeting will convene in order that council may give considerations to the items on the public hearing agenda, as well as council agenda items. However, if during the public hearing council requests further information related to an item, or a council member requests that the consideration of an item be deferred, then the consideration of that item will actually be deferred pending receipt of the requested information. I'll now call on Mr. Gilbert to introduce the bylaws on tonight's agenda and the Planning and Development staff to make a presentation on the first item.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item this evening is an application to enter into a heritage revitalization agreement and a heritage designation bylaw for the properties at 800 and 804 Gauthier Avenue. These are bylaws number 4628 and 4629.
Planner with the City, here to introduce the Heritage Revitalization Agreement and Heritage Designation bylaws for 800 and 804 Gauthier Avenue, where we're seeking to restore and relocate Prost House. The site is located on the southeast corner of Gauthier Avenue and Thrift Street across from Alderson Elementary School. And the two existing RT1 zone lots involved in the application each contain a one-family dwelling, with 804 Gauthier Avenue, the site to the east, containing Prost House. The OCP designation of the site is medium density apartment in the city's official community plan. The adjacent zoning of the site is as follows. The site and the sites to the west are zoned RT1 two-family residential. The zoning of the property to the north, where Alderson Elementary School is P1 civic institutional. The zoning to the east is RT1 two-family residential and RM3 medium density apartment. The sites to the south are RT1 two-family residential, with the site directly to the south having an existing heritage revitalization agreement on that property with 10 townhouses. The proposed Heritage Revitalization Agreement will restore and rehabilitate Prost House as part of a development that proposes to relocate Prost House to the corner of the site at the street intersection and construct 9 new townhomes on the balance of the lands. The Heritage Designation Bylaw also proposes additional legal protection to the Prost residents, which would prohibit someone from making changes to the building thereafter without first obtaining a heritage alteration permit from the city. Staff recommend all final readings to Heritage Revitalization Agreement Bylaw 4628, 2016, and Heritage Designation Bylaw 4629, 2016. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker registered for this item. That's the architect for the applicant, Eric Pattison, Pattison Architecture.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. As mentioned, I'm Eric Pattison with Pattison Architecture for this project before you. I just have a few slides to run through with just the high points of the application. You have a more complete report in your package. The site, as mentioned, is at the corner of Gauthier and Thrift. You can see in the photograph Lougheed Highway up at the top and the school site at the bottom of the photograph. The site is outlined, and on the left-hand side of that is the Prost House. The house on the corner is not part of the application. And then, as mentioned, also across the lane, you might recall the Maison Rocheloup that we brought for you a couple of years ago was completed last year, and I think it's a really interesting example of how this HRA process plays out, with the Heritage House being a landmark on the corner of the site, really setting a tone in the neighborhood. The site, is, as the notes say, is very well suited to, I think, this approach. It's quite a unique opportunity to have 2 HRAs mirroring each other at each end of the block. Multifamily apartments are further to the east, and that this is part of the OCP designation for the entire block. Just some quick site photographs if you're not familiar with it. On the upper shot, the house there is the house that is not part of the HRA. On the lower photograph, you can see the Prost House behind the hedge with its distinctive roof dormer. The site gently slopes down to the west towards Thrift. The heritage aspects of the site are quite unusual in this time, because we're used to dealing a lot with, obviously, Francophone families in Millardville, but there were also other families, and so there are a lot of Scandinavians came to British Columbia over the early decades of the 20th century to work in the forest industry. And so the Prost family is an example of that. Magnus and Helmi met in Port Alberni. Magnus was working in the forest industry, and a lot of the trees from Vancouver Island, of course, were being milled in Coquitlam down on the river at Fraser Mills. So I guess he'd had enough of the bush. They moved here and set up shop in western Millardville and started to raise their family. This was a great opportunity for us because the house was still in the hands of the family, and Alan Prost was still resident, so I got to meet him. And yes, we had some photographs, so it was very rare that we find original photographs. On the left-hand side, you can see the original cottage, just a small 3-room cottage they built in the corner of the lot. And I think he was probably thinking ahead, because he built it out of the way of where he built eventually the new house in front of the cottage, and in fact moved the cottage forward, and as you'll see, connected it to the new house. The one tinted sepia shot, you can see that it's kind of a unique opportunity, because you can see that Magnus is actually using plywood sheathing on the walls. The framing sheathing is plywood as opposed to shiplap. So he was being quite modern. That was a material that really took off in World War II and was being manufactured in British Columbia. A quick rundown on the Statement of Significance. As we know, the SOS is a tool used across Canada to give us kind of a press release, if you will, about historic places. The description of it is fairly self-evident, but this house is intact and original. The only modern thing, perhaps, is the front door has a nice aluminum screen door on it, but it's hiding a nice stain-grade fir door. On either side of the door, just barely see it, are obscure glass panels with lines in them called reeded glass. That's a very modern mid-century type of glass that you see in a lot of offices, privacy glass. The heritage values, as I mentioned, are associated with the historic fact of the Scandinavian family ending up in Millardville, And of course, with a lot of our Millardville projects, the Fraser Mills connection is very important, that these are all social and economic associations that we find. Scandinavian community is mentioned, and the fact that Magnus built this by himself and in 2 stages. So you can see here the lower portion. This is the original cottage, that lower pitched, so that you can see the 2 rooms at the front. So they just moved it over, dragged it over probably with a tractor and connected it to the new house that faces the street. Quite an unusual character-defining feature. And then the aesthetic values of a mid-century modern house. So this is early modernism and a very vernacular modernism. Obviously, there was no architect involved, but not too poorly handled nonetheless. Character-defining elements are those physical things that embody the values that we talk about. So you can see a nice list there of elements that remain, and then at the bottom, some mid-century features, as we say. All of these things became into the modernist vernacular after World War II. And as you can imagine, through the 50s and up until the 60s, this sort of design aesthetic became very popular and prevalent style. So we're seeing craftsman style and arts and crafts, pre-World War II stuff, starting to fade away. And modernism after World War II, it was a rebuild of everything, especially in Europe. People wanted to start from zero, was the phrase. Nonetheless, some very interesting things, and I particularly like here in the upper photograph is this, there's a pipe rail and a concrete landing to get to the clothesline, so I'm sure Helmy said, make sure I have that clothesline out the back. Yeah. So she got it. The site planning for the project, as you probably look through your package, like a lot of these HRA projects, site planning is a real knitting together of all the opportunities and constraints, as we call them, everything from slopes to vehicle access to open space, to green space to amenities. So with the site plan, we've tried to identify those key elements to you. But I kind of like the way the red arrows point to all the access points to the site, both to residences and to walkways and to vehicles where people do walk through, bicycles. Sort of everybody is accessing all sides of the site, and to me that's satisfying because it shows it's kind of dispersed and lively at all the perimeters. It's a real kind of place to live and call your neighborhood. A breakdown on the parking. This is compared to RT2, which is is a townhouse zone. In your package, there was an answer to the question about zoning comparisons, and it compared the RT1 sort of single-family duplex with the RM zones. The RT2 is kind of right in the middle. So we're quite pleased that we were able to provide 3 additional parking spaces than those required, as well as the 2 visitor spots. And when you count the street parking, I know it's not part of our calculation, but there are 31 spaces in this general area. Finally, the exterior views of the building, mid-century modern elements that we took inspiration from the Heritage House, and so things like horizontal Muntin bars in the windows. There's no longer grids, just strictly horizontals. It's more of a horizontal approach to the architecture, so the windows themselves are more wider than they are high. We've used some nice materials on the townhouse entries, so you can see a wood door, stained wood door with horizontal windows for them in the townhouse entry doors. The colors are recreating the historic colors that we found on the house with some reinterpretations to break up the stucco massing, whatnot. But the window sash were black, so we're doing a nice black window sash, which will really make the project look elegant and give it really good eyes, as we say, with the windows. And finally, just 3D view that you saw in your package as well, with the Heritage House taking prime of place on the corner. Some very nice little interior details. We hope to save this. Probably may or may not survive, but the little alcove for the phone, ironically, that archway is reflected throughout the interior in various alcoves and niches. They have a similar arch, so I thought it was nice to end with the telephone in there, although it's a modern phone. I'm available for any questions, if any arise, or I can hand it back to you.
I have one. There was a question raised at first reading related to the visitors' parking space that's underneath a living area. We'll look at that right almost in the middle of that photograph, underneath the courtyard. That visitor's space is living space over top of it, and that's odd.
Yes. We didn't know which way to jump on it. We wanted to make sure we met the bylaw. Mm-hmm. So it does technically provide the visitor parking space that's required. And we are overparked on our townhouse units. So we meet the bylaw, we exceed the bylaw for a number of residential stalls, but we have the 2 visitor stalls. And as you can see with the site, there's really nowhere else to put it. So there's certainly an option where we could change that visitor stall back into a garage and be one less on the visitors, and know that every unit's got 2 stalls, which is, I know, the direction you're going. But you can see how the site is constrained. There's really nowhere else to put another stall with open air above. So I leave it to council which way they'd like to see that evolve.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think that's how it ends up evolving anyway. I can't imagine the owner of one unit giving up his version of the second stall. So, but Councillor Reid and Councillor Wilson. Councillor Reid.
Mine is the same question. That's just doesn't make any sense to have that a visitor stall. That person will be using it. And when you say 31 spaces, if you're talking about my street parking spaces, don't do that. Because they're not for this unit.
I realize that, and it says they're just street parking. They're available. They're not part of the calculation.
Yeah, well, we keep using them as available street parking, and then you get 9 developments on the same street, and they're all using the same parking. We're going to have ladders for them to get in their cars. So I'm trying to figure out all the visitor parking. There's just 2 visitor, correct?
Correct.
And the 17 are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, 17 and the 2 visitor. Okay, I'm a happy girl. Thank you.
And there's 3 for the Heritage House. 2 for
Yeah,
the
I
house
see that.
and 1
Yeah,
for
I
the
see
suite,
that.
which is not on the driveway. It's to the side there.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
On the original picture you showed of the new development of the previous HRA, yeah, they're great. In behind, at the south end of this site, there's those nice tall trees. Are those going to be able to be kept, or are they going to be lost?
No, they'll be removed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Are there any speakers to this item? Mr. Poy.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm a little, my name's Albert Poy. I live at 2340 Haversley Avenue, Coquitlam, BC. Just as before I start, I wanted to dispel any ideas that have been given to you previously by members of this council. One, I've been doing development work myself for 45 years. I've been a landlord for over 35 years, and I currently am a landlord. And I've heard disparaging remarks about my past, but I wanted to assure you I do have the qualification that I do talk about. All right? This project, the first thing, you don't have the map right. This map shows that you can get onto the Lougheed Highway. You can't from there. It's not open. All that traffic from the school, from this additional development, has to be fed down Roderick onto Blue Mountain. Now, you can't get there. I wish this council would start putting the facts in the paper. Same thing happened last time I was here. You can't. There's a garage in the way. I walk this district every day for 1 hour. So I know what I talk about, Pete. The second thing...
Sir, just are you talking about the map that was published?
I'm talking about the map that's published. That's misleading to the rest of the people in Coquitlam.
Okay, that's good. Can we have the map put up, please? Okay, that's only the parcel map. It doesn't actually show.
Oh, that's fine.
I understand where you're coming from about the perception, but it's actually just the parcel map. It doesn't have the streets. Someone address the standard practice is to publish the parcel map, which actually shows only the property lines of private property, and the parts that aren't private property are where the roads are, but that doesn't necessarily indicate the way they connect.
Well, this gives you the wrong impression that you could get onto the low-heat highway.
And I'll ask staff to address that.
And that's a big, big deal.
I'll ask staff to address that, please.
We keep...
We'll just ask.
Why I oppose this...
I'll just ask staff to address that.
Okay, go ahead.
Your Worship, this is a legal cadastral map that we referred to because it has both street addresses and I believe also the legals on it, but it's certainly the street addresses, and it's based on the city's road system. Road allowances, it's not the actual physical built roads or curb line of roads, or so it can be, I guess, one didn't understand what they're looking at, it could be misleading. But it's a legal base map to show the subject property.
Okay.
And if I could just add, the reason there's not a Schedule A because it's an HRA agreement, the land's not being rezoned in the same way, so we don't have a schedule to the bylaw.
I can't hear you, sir.
We don't have a schedule to the bylaw that would normally be published. It's part of this process.
It's a heritage revitalization agreement, and not a.
I think you're going to publish something.
They're just giving the explanation as to how it ended up in the paper like this. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the explanation.
Well, it gives the wrong impression of the whole thing to people out there. The other reason I oppose this is I'm tired of this density, which increases taxes. And that's what density does. And if anybody wants to challenge me, I'll say it right now. Density is related to taxes. There isn't a place, if you look up a city in North America or Europe or Asia, that can show you density and affordability. Not one. Yet we, in Coquitlam, after 40 years of building density, like we've been doing, still want to keep increasing the taxes. You want me to subsidize it. My taxes on my personal house of 45 years just went up, and I got it today. I'll be paying 6.5% more. 6.5%. I don't think I should be subsidizing these developments. That's why I oppose it. You're driving people like me who built this community out. Heck, you're so worried about developers and density, you're even taking the curling rink away. But yet you'll sit here and talk for a long time about an old house and heritage. What about the heritage of us guys who built the curling rink with volunteer labor? You forget that? Did you forget that we also did it with scrounge materials? And now you come along because of density and tell me you can't have it anymore after we just built a new one. I want you people to start looking at what you're doing. You're not building a community, and that's why I oppose it. You're everything for density and subsidizing of developments. Even last week, in the paper, you have to talk about the transit tax increase again. That's not going to make affordability. It's not going to build a community. It's just another subsidy to our developers and the density. I find it terrible that any one of you who took a contribution from a developer would be voting on this. I find it just unbelievable. And then you're going to funnel all this school traffic out onto Blue Mountain, which is so crowded right now, it's unsafe. You know, I couldn't get to the hospital for over 2 hours because I could not get across the low-heat highway and the Burnett overpass. I want you to think about that. Safety. Before you approve this density. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to this item? Any other speakers to this item? Councillor Zerillo.
Before it closes, about the crosswalk, I think I asked that when we first decided to go to public hearing if there was going to be a crosswalk or if we had some information about that. For the school, and what I mean is for the school, from this development to the school.
Let me answer your question, Councilor. I walk every day, okay? I
sorry.
walk by that school.
She's asking staff, though.
Okay, that's the staff.
Thank you. Mr. Diozegi. Mr. Diozegi is our city engineer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have my notes here that the Alderson Elementary School to the northeast was part of the walkability program study. Improvements were identified and implemented in the neighborhood that included a marked zebra crossing at Bernacchi and Gauthier. So I'm not aware of any further crosswalks related improvements in the immediate vicinity.
Could we just get the map quickly? I just, Bernacchi, okay. Because I believe there was a development on the east side of this street as well. I think the corner of Blue Mountain that we were talking about, maybe a crosswalk. So any kids that live in this development or the one on the east end of this block would have to cross at the corner without a crosswalk, right?
That is correct. Typically, as probably you all know, before we would provide a marked pedestrian crossing, it needs to meet some warrants. And based on that, relatively recently, we looked at this area. I think it's safe to assume that this particular location does not meet the criteria for mark the crosswalk. However, we will be pleased to look at it again, carry out some counts, and determine whether at this time it's warranted.
Thanks, because I'm just looking, I think the Rochelieu Cottage turned into there was townhouses there, correct? There'll be townhouses to the north, and I think we have a medium density apartment building going to the east. So yeah, just to keep our eyes open for that, that'd be awesome.
We'll be more than happy to do that. Probably, if I may suggest, let's wait until the recently approved developments are occupied, and then when schools are back in proper session, that's when we would carry out the study.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to this item? Are there any other speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, I'll declare this item closed.
The next item, item 2, is an application to amend City of Coquitlam zoning bylaw number 3000 in order to rezone the properties at 1415, 1419, and 1423 Pipeline Road from RS2 one-family suburban residential to RS3 one-family residential. This is bylaw number 4684.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Chris Jarvie, Acting Supervisor, Development Planning. As Mr. Gilbert alluded to, item 2 is for properties at 1415, 19, and 1423 Pipeline Road. They're on the east side of Pipeline Road, north of Robson Drive. They are currently zoned RS2 suburban residential, and adjacent zoning in the area is a mix of RS2 suburban residential, RS3 one-family residential, P2, P1, as well as P5. The property is located within the Northwest Coquitlam area plan and is currently designated one-family residential. The requested zone of RS3 is a corresponding zone to that land use designation. Should that rezoning be supported by council, it could facilitate the subdivision into 11 single-family lots. As part of that subdivision, it would also include the extension of El Camino Drive, widening of Pipeline Road, the installation of some sound attenuation fencing along Pipeline, as well as the closing of Pipeline Frontage Road to the north there. Staff recommendation is that council grant second, third, and fourth and final reading to the bylaw 4684 2016. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any speakers to this item? Are there any speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any speakers to this item, item 2? Pipeline? Sure, come step forward.
Good evening, everybody. I am the owner, and the address is 1439. When they're talking about...
And your name and address?
Oh, yes, sorry, yeah. Shaleem Henry, and the address is 1439 Pipeline Road.
Thank you.
Right now, when you turn on Pipeline, we are the first homes, but what the city is, or whatever this project is, they're going to close the street, and we're going to be the last houses as compared to right now, the beginning of the houses. So what we have been told that the value for houses are going to go down because we're going to be right at the end of the street. That's what we have been told. And just the major concern is then you're going to be going through the 11 properties and all the parking. On that road, there's already a big major issue about parking. There is nowhere to park on Pipeline.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, so you live, there's another map that I think shows this. There we go. You're
1439.
just off this map, are you?
So basically that would put me to the second last house.
Number 2.
Number 2.
Or no,
Or number 3, sorry.
Number 3, okay. Yep. Okay. I'm not certain about the property value. We don't normally get to deal with property values here, but I would think being at the end of the cul-de-sac is actually preferred than having that much traffic go in front of you, but that's, you know, I'm not an expert in that either. Is there an answer? So staff have a comment related to the parking. Is there street parking on the frontage road west side, for example? I assume the east side is somewhat hampered by driveways and such. Mr. Diozegi.
Your Worship, it appears that on the west side of the subject frontage road, there is parking practically used. And I can see from the submission that the development to the south, which is the subject property, will provide an 8.5 meter wide pavement, and so parking will be permitted on both sides of the road.
Is the, I can't remember, is the frontage road to be improved to city standards, full cross-section?
At this point, we are dealing with this particular application, so the southerly half.
Yep. I withdraw the question. Okay.
That's it.
Have anything else?
No, that's it.
No. Thank you very much. Are Are there any other speakers to this item? Are there any other speakers to this item? Pipeline Road, are there any other speakers the last time? Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Svetlana Ivanova, and I live the last house on Pipeline before on the map. It is showed like supposed to be closed.
What was the number?
So 1441 Pipeline Road.
1441.
Yeah.
So number
And
2. Okay.
Our neighbor just spoke, so. Okay, I have a question. If we look at the map, maybe if we can put it a little bit down. So it shows that actually the closing is going to be exactly next to our house. Is it correct? Because actually, if you look at the Pipeline Road and the entrance to that part of Pipeline Road, there are 2 more houses above ours. And if you close it this way, this means that only 2 houses will remain with an entrance to Pipeline Road. So my question is the map correct? Or actually the closing is going to be exactly where the entrance is now?
Okay. Now, you'll recall the previous item, there was a conversation about this kind of map, which doesn't show the curbs of the street. It shows where the road right-of-way is, and that dotted line shows neither of those. So we'll ask Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you, Your Worship. The subdivision would deal with the road closure as well as the actual physical design of that cul-de-sac. But the thought is that all existing driveways on that cul-de-sac would remain, would have their accesses retained off of that cul-de-sac. So it would be designed accordingly to accommodate those driveways.
So the 2 property owners north of her that she's describing would still access El Camino, and none of the driveways would access Pipeline.
Correct. The idea is to get all the driveways off of Pipeline and keep them all on this, what is currently called the frontage road, and which would ultimately be called El Camino.
Okay, so, but what is the purpose then closing just around our house and just leaving those two houses with access to Pipeline?
No, they won't have access to Pipeline. They'll actually probably have longer driveways to access the end of El Camino.
So the whole intersection is going to be closed, right?
The curb on Pipeline will keep going straight north, and there won't be any access to what is now your entrance of your street.
Okay, and do we have any development around this? I mean, do we have any plan of the development, how the cul-de-sac is going to look like now, or not yet?
I'll go to Mr. Jarvie, and then I might go to Mr. Duzegi. Mr. Jarvie on the planning side.
Thank you. At this stage, we've only got a concept talking about how the cul-de-sac would conceptually be established. Should council grant this rezoning application, it would move to the next stage of the subdivision application, in which we would move into a further detailed review and get a more technical drawing submitted by the applicant on how it would be developed.
Would that be done in consultation with neighboring residents that are affected?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So right now we're dealing only with this doesn't seem like it, but we're dealing with the land use on the south where all the small numbers are. We're dealing with whether or not that should be single-family homes. This is kind of, it's one of those consequential things that has to be done if we do this. And then they will consult with you to make sure it works for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zrillo.
And I know, I understand that we're dealing with the zoning of the south property, but is the developer that is going to do the redevelopment in the south going to pay for the road changes north when we close off Pipeline or when we close off El Camino?
I believe so, but we'll go to Mr. Jarvie.
That is correct.
It's good to know. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any others? We'll do it one more time. Are there any other speakers to this item? You can put your hand up at number 1 if you want. Are there any other speakers to this item? The third and final time, are there any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, I'll declare this item closed.
The next item, the last item of the public hearing, pertains to an application to amend the zoning bylaw in order to rezone the properties at 717, 719, and 721 Breslay Street from RT1 two-family residential to RM3 multi-story medium-density apartment residential. This is bylaw number 4683.
Thank you. Good evening again, Your Worship and members of council. As Mr. Gilbert alluded to, this property is on Breslay Street, the east side of Breslay Street. It's north of Smith Avenue, south of Reagan Avenue. It's currently zoned RT1, two-family residential. The adjacent zoning to the property is RT1, RM2, and RM3, medium-density apartment residential, as well as RT2, townhousing zone. The property is currently located about 340 meters from the Coquitlam SkyTrain station. It's located within the Coquitlam neighborhood plan and designated medium-density apartment residential. Accordingly, the applicant has requested a rezoning to RM3 to do a 6-story apartment building located with the access off of the lane, front pedestrian access along Breslay Street. Part of the application would include the provision of a public pedestrian walkway. Still image there. And staff are recommending that council grant second and third reading to bylaw 4683, 2016.
Okay, item 3, we have 2 speakers registered. We'll begin with William Rolston. Who apparently doesn't have very much to say. Mr. Rolston, is Mr. Rolston here? William Rolston? Okay, we'll go to the second one, which is the architect for the applicant. It's a representative of Coquitlam Architect, Shannon Seefeld. And she will correct my pronunciation on both of those.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Shannon Seefeld, and with Coquitlam Architecture. And we're the architects on this development and have just prepared a quick presentation for our project. Just make sure I know how to use this. Just a slight context, we went through this just a minute ago, but our proposal consists of three sites, the consolidation of 3 sites, 717 through 721, located on the east side of Breslay Street. To the north, we are directly adjacent to an existing residential duplex property. To the south, a development for a 7-story multifamily residential building is currently under construction and rezoned to RM3. The east property line fronts a lane, and across the lane are existing single-family lots, and a number of those are currently under various stages of redevelopment under the OCP. To the west, across Breslay Street, are several newer 3-story townhome developments. The consolidated site area of our proposal is 24,636 square feet. And within our site, there's a 2.25 meter right-of-way running east-west along the length of the south property line, contributing to the second half of a 4.5 meter public pedestrian walkway. The site slopes from the north to the south approximately 2 feet, and east to west slopes down 6 feet along the north property line and 9 feet along the south property line. Our project includes the rezoning within the RM3 zone, which allows for up to 8 stories and a density of 2.4 FSR. Our proposal is for a 6-story multifamily residential building with a total building area of 56,662 square feet, or 2.3 FSR, and includes 2 levels of underground parking. The building consists of 24 1-bedroom, 32 bedroom, and 10 3-bedroom units for a total of 64 homes, ranging in size from approximately 593 square feet to 1,050 square feet. And within that total, we are proposing 4 adaptable units, 2 of them 1 bedroom and 2 2-bedrooms. Indoor residential amenity space is located on the main floor adjacent to the lobby and includes a fitness room, lounge, and meeting room. Outdoor amenities include a kids' play area and a common outdoor patio adjacent to the indoor amenity. The main level finished floor elevation was established and sited with the existing site grades to balance the habitable space above and below average grade. This allows for maximum interface between the lower level units along the various frontages along Breslay Street, the pedestrian link on the south boundary, and the outdoor amenity areas on the east and north. The ground floor units along all elevations have direct access to private outdoor patio spaces. The homes fronting Breslay Street and the pedestrian walkway have direct private access from the patio or sidewalk via individual garden stairs and a gateway with feature lighting and individual addresses. In order to engage the street at a more pedestrian scale, the patios fronting Breslay have been lowered by 18 inches to minimize any grade change and enhance the street level experience. Additionally, the main entrance lobby was lowered by 2 feet to create a presence as well as create greater volume in both the interior lobby space and the architectural elevation. Visitor bike stalls and a seating bench were designed into the main entry area to create additional activity and definition of the front door. Parking access, loading, and a holding area for garbage and recycling day are accessed from the rear lane. Our parking is provided over the 2 underground levels with 13 visitor stalls provided in a secure area with a visitor call box located at the top of the ramp. A garbage and recycling room is located directly inside the parkade. 78 resident parking stalls are accessed through an additional secured overhead gate. Resident bike storage is provided in a combination of lockers in secure rooms as well as bike hooks located at the front end of a number of regular-sized parking stalls. In addition, there are 64 secured lockers provided for individual unit storage. The second, third, and fourth floor plans have the same footprint as the main floor. 5th and 6th floors are set back on the south elevation. The stepping back takes advantage of the southern exposure for the top 2 floors. The homes on the 5th floor have additional outdoor space with expanded patios. A 3D model helps to show the massing of the building as described in the building plans. The overall building height being 6 stories with the top 2 floors set back at the south, minimizing the density along the edge fronting the pedestrian pathway and the southern end of the building facing Breslay Street. The building footprint is further stepped back along the north end of Breslay Street frontage and provides a break to the building's length and reads almost as 2 buildings. Variations in roof height further articulate the facade as the building is viewed from all sides. These are the east and west elevation, the west and east elevations facing Breslay Street and the lane respectively. The architectural character for the building is contemporary urban with an aligned facade offset with inset balconies, creating a pattern of vertical and horizontal elements. An urban edge is further reinforced with the townhouse-like entries at ground level units, as well as the high-volume entry and amenity area. Strong roof lines extend at various elevations, reinforcing the stepping of the buildings both vertically and horizontally. A 2-story base is defined with a strong color selection that surrounds the building on all facades. Verticality is established with solids and voids created by balconies inset from the exterior wall and further defined with the color change to a softer color on the upper levels. A strong vertical element has been designed to extend 5 stories and transition horizontally at the 6th floor, creating interest in the elevation and front entry. Distinct horizontal dealing at the facade above the building entry and 4-story portion at the end elevation contrasts the vertical elements with a change in material and color. With the building's front entry and lobby lowered, it engages the street at a pedestrian scale and provides volume in the common lobby and amenity area. The south elevation, the one on the top, shows the 4-story roof, and as well as the garden access to the lower level units along the pedestrian path and into the rear yard amenity. And the horizontal and vertical detailing is continuous around all 4 elevations. The rendering shot is taken from across the street to the north, looking south down Breslay Street. This shows the interface of the lower level of the building with the street and the active front entrance and individual garden access to each of those units fronting Breslay Street. And just our material palette includes concrete with reveals at the planter and front entry. The material on the upper, along the facade is hardy panel with vertical pattern of reveals, vertical and horizontal panel reveals, and the cedar color details are built out horizontal siding with a tight spacing, and the red accent is the painted wood detail. Overall, the color scheme are shades of gray with the accents of the cedar and red. Thank you.
A question from Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. I believe in the presentation you indicated the FSR is 2.3, and the zoning would allow for 2.4. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Question to staff. And on page 3 of the report, the zoning bylaw, it speaks to a 13% variance above the maximum lot coverage. So could somebody explain the difference between the statement and the report, please?
The difference between floor space ratio and lot coverage.
Thank you, Your Worship. The density is a base density that's calculated against the overall size of the property. So in this case, the ratio, as Mrs. Seefeld alluded to, is 2.3 times what they're proposing. That's over all the levels, whereas the lot coverage talks about on the ground, how much of the building is sited on that ground. In this case, the rationale, the reason why the lot coverage has been exceeded is due to the slope and bringing portions of the underground parking above the ground. Technically, in our zoning bylaw, anything that's greater than 1.3 meters above ground counts as a building and above, so therefore lot coverage. So the actual building itself meets the lot coverage requirements. However, there's some portions of the underground, and that's a result of the applicant moving the access to the underground off the lane and going a bit against the grade, which pushes a portion of the building up.
Okay, and so the adjustments on the 5th and 6th floors with regards to the relief there it prevents it from exceeding the FSR, correct?
There's a combination of the FSR as well as trying to get some building articulation, some interest and design in there.
Okay, thank you. Access to this one is off the lane, correct? Parking access. Is that, and I believe a neighboring property has a similar access off the lane, so I'm wondering about the lane capacity in terms of its width for traffic, for garbage trucks, that type of thing. Are we approaching a capacity on this lane in terms of what it was designed for and what it will be subjected to with the complete development?
Your Worship, the lane is a standard lane, and we anticipate appropriate speed to be used on that laneway, and even with a much lower speed, or if higher, won't make a difference. The capacity of the lane is more than adequate.
Okay. And so the standard width on that would be, of a lane is?
The paved width of the laneway is 5.1 meters, curb to curb width.
Okay. And there's no proposed changes to that with this project, correct?
There is no change. However, I should mention that it's a transitional section, and the northerly section is 5.1 meters, and as we go further south, it's going to reduce down to the standard width, which is 4.6 meters, and it's still adequate for handling the traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. On attachment 3, you're showing a loading zone in the top right-hand corner. Is that loading, because the garbage is right in front of it, the garbage staging? Is that loading zone for the actual furniture moving and stuff like that? And where's the access then into the building from the loading zone?
It's also shown on the overhead right now. Anyone want that one?
Sure.
Okay.
The garbage that's shown in the back is just a staging area, so that would happen on garbage day only. The moving in and out, there's a gate, if you can see it, at the top, just by the truck wheels, and that takes you along a path and left into a door that takes you right into the main corridor.
Okay, that's good.
Straight to the elevator.
Okay. No, okay. That's it. Thank you. Is William Ralston arrived? No. Okay, are there any other speakers to this item? Mr. Boy.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. My name's Albert Poy. I live at 2340 Haversley Avenue, Coquitlam, BC. I've looked at this project. I've walked around it. This is a typical density project in Coquitlam. This night is very special to talk about density in this project. The density leads to higher taxes. Last week in the paper, I'll show you why higher taxes, because this council's told me before it doesn't. But I'm going to show you it does. Last week, the mayor's council come out. They want to increase property tax for transit. They said $4 per household. Afraid not. Mine will go up $7.50. I read it very clearly. Yeah, and that's a tax increase. Another tax increase, they want to increase development costs. Well, then I get you people hypothetically talking to me about affordable housing. Well, I don't know how you guys can justify this density, this increased taxes, and then want affordable housing at Coquitlam. It doesn't happen. Not a hope in heck. The third thing is, you were talking about just because of density for transit, you're going to increase fares to cover up to 50% of the cost. Hold it. The more fares you use in transit, the more taxes your density wants me to pay. Because every time you use it, it's not the fares we charge don't even come close to covering it. You want to subsidize these developers more and more and more. Yet, I just heard when I talk about taxes, want to save some heritage property. But you don't want to save the heritage of curlers, not a chance. You want to do away with it, and you just announced last week in the paper why. Again, it's back to density. You need the ice time. For who? For all this new density. Because you're not doing your job and building and planning properly. I then looked at this proposal. You're going to be asking to increase taxes for new fire equipment. Because, why? Look at all the density in the high rises and the higher buildings going up. I don't see anything in there coming. I then looked at the $17.5 million. Yes, you're giving away to the Coquitlam. Why? They need a rec center. I thought this was paid for by your density, you told me. Again, it's not. And again, you're going to take away the Poirier one with the curlers to solve this density problem. And then again this week I got my 6.5% increase. 6.5%. Yet this council always talks about affordability and helping renters, and we have rent controls that don't allow over 3%. But you have no trouble with density and increasing taxes. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to ever come up here and support density when my children can't afford to live in this district. I'm not going to support density when you're trying to drive me out after 45 years. I paid my taxes. I didn't cheat like most people do with their suites in their houses here, which you encourage. No, I paid my taxes. I'm afraid density, and I have to speak against it, is bad. Density, you also made me take the course, being a landlord, multifamily units have 80% of the crime in the district. Think about it. Again, you're building more multi-density, cramming them in there. You're going to have higher crime rates. You've already asked me in the last 10 years, 3 times, to approve and pay tax increases for more RCMP. Yet the more people doesn't cover it. The more units doesn't cover it. Council, I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to get you to understand there isn't a place in the world that density has allowed affordability and community coherentness. What it's allowed is a few people to make a lot of money, to have increased crime, and then you complain when people start moving away. So when people approach you about your tax increase, I want you to start being honest. No more telling me and telling the district here, our taxpayers, that the development costs pay for it. They don't pay for the hospitals. They don't pay for the schools. They don't pay for the firemen. They don't pay for the parks. Not a thing. So I don't know how you can keep pressing on with density, density, density. Look at the traffic congestion. You haven't built a new road on this part of Coquitlam, up where I live on the Heights, in 45 years. What have you done? You turned Austin into a freeway. You turned Como Lake into a freeway so they're unsafe for children. You've stopped children from walking to school because it's unsafe. That's not a community. I want you to start thinking about building a community and not just about profits and campaign contributions. Thank you. Got any questions? I'd be glad to answer.
Okay, Councillor Zerillo.
Yeah, my questions are for staff. Thank you, Mr. Poy. Mine are for staff.
Pardon?
I'm okay. Mine are for staff. Thank you.
Okay.
So I just had 2 questions, and some of it relates to just a refresher about what happened at the site at 711. It seems to me I remember that we went through a text amendment, and then we made some changes for the footprint. They had a smaller coverage, and I just wanted to understand, and if you could just remind me why the building beside had a smaller square footage footprint on the lot, and if there was a variance for that one as far as lot coverage.
Mr. Jarvie.
Thank you, Your Worship. To be honest, Councillor Zerillo, I'm not sure about the specifics on the neighbouring property, but the way the zone is configured is simply the higher you go, the lower your lot coverage is. So a taller building would require a lower lot coverage.
Right, but I remember we had a text amendment to make some changes for that for a certain amount of 3 or 4 projects in Coquitlam, and I'm just wondering if I could get a refresher on that. The reason I'm asking is because this one is asking for a variance, and I'm wondering if we can get away without doing the variance.
A few years ago, we did go through a process where we looked at the RM3 zone, and the zone has traditionally allowed heights of between 4 and 8 stories. The density prior was 1.85 times the lot area. What we looked at was an option of moving above that, and so we've introduced higher densities. They weren't specific to any application at the time. It was noticing a gap in our development form between that 4-story and high rises, so as a way to kind of capture some additional density in there. Then through that, when we started looking at buildings going taller to reduce the impact on those, we started lowering the lot coverage the higher you went. So it wasn't tied to a specific development. It was a general text amendment that we did to look at that RM3 zone.
Okay, and this one isn't, there's no way to do this one that way, or we can try to keep it within the footprint that's within the bylaw?
Well, the building itself would meet the allowable lot coverage. It's the portions of the underground that project beyond 5 feet out of the ground that are resulting in the lot coverage variance. And it's because they're taking access from the lane in order to keep the street continuity and no driveway letdowns along Breslay. And as a result, they're kind of fighting the grade a bit to get down to the underground. And so as a result, some portions of that underground are sticking above ground.
So 7-Eleven has access from the lane?
I believe that is the case, yes.
Okay, my other question is about the pedestrian pathway. This one I think is wonderful. There's a really good straight shot right into what will be Coquitlam shopping, so that's wonderful. But I just wonder about lighting on this walkway and accessibility. Is it fully accessible for people with mobility issues and even wheelchairs, and will it be lighted?
Your Worship, I'll take a try that one. Typically with walkways, and perhaps my colleague, the city engineer, and Mr. Zegi can comment on this as well, but the typical practice is when you have walkways that are going between, say, one street through to the next, you want to make sure there's a clear line of sight for someone going through there. And also in the evening hours, so there's lighting, and typically the street lights are placed at the end of that to give lighting, so there's a safe visibility through that area. In terms of the accessibility, it would be to the same standards as we design anything else. Our sidewalks, our pathways and parks is to meet all code and bylaw standards, so it would be accessible on those bases.
Okay, and did I hear that there is going to be street frontage doors on the south side of the building there, on the pathway? Or is it just patios?
The units have been designed with patios as well as gates to access down to that walkway.
Okay, so there could potentially be activity facing the walkway?
Yeah, and typically what we see is that developers put some kind of a signage, like Unit 101 or whatever it is, just to give it a clearly identifiable feature.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other speakers to this item? Actually, we'll get you to hang on a second. We'll just ask if there's any other speakers to this item that haven't spoken yet? Any others? No? Okay. Come on down.
Just wanted to clarify the question Councillor Cirillo had regarding the access to the building at 7-Eleven to the south. It is from the street. Yeah. And our original proposal was with the parkade access from the street, and the comments that came back for engineering were put it in the back. So that's, yes, yes, yeah. So just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. No, yours. Yep. Just a second. I'm going to reactivate. Your microphone went off. Go ahead.
Press it again.
Staff.
There you go.
So would it be the preference of the architect yourself to have access from the front?
The natural access would be at the lowest point on the site, so that's where we started from. As far as it coming from the lane, there's advantages to that as well, where we can have the garbage and the loading, also not blocking any of the street parking. So it's not necessarily preferred, but it was the starting point, and the precedent was set with the building to the south. Their parking was off the street, so that's where we began.
Okay. Are there any other speakers to this item? Any other speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any other speakers to this item? Seeing none, I'll declare this item and the public hearing closed. Take a short break.